All right, and can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so today's topic is social media and the effects it has on mental and emotional health. With this technological age we are in, combined with the pandemic and associated quarantines, social media is now really used more than it ever has been. And while it has its benefits, the risks are extraordinarily detrimental to one's mental and emotional well-being. As an overview of some things we will go over today, we will discuss some positive and negative effects of social media, recognizing the role it has and how it can manipulate your emotions and thought processes, how memory and development are impacted by the use of social media, the dangers of fake news and false memories, some statistics of how social media has affected mental health since the most commonly used platforms have taken off, and some tips and tricks on how to mitigate some of the negative effects and avoid falling victims to the risks of it. So to start off, we will talk about some of the pros of social media before we start digging into the dangers of it. Social media was designed to connect with people, to share ideas, thoughts, feelings, and information. It can be a way to build social groups and expand your community and find like-minded people. And during this time of COVID, especially when lockdowns started happening, it really offered a way of maintaining friendships and relationships at a safe distance. I know me personally, I have done a couple of holidays now with everybody just on Zoom meetings or even Facebook conference calls. So it has offered a really good way to stay connected. It can be a cool way to piece together a timeline of your life and an easy access point to learn more about your interests or your hobbies. Some additional mental health benefits: it can be an important source of connection for more marginalized groups, such as those who live in rural areas or those who suffer from social anxiety or agoraphobia and challenges such as that. It can be used as a creative outlet to share music or pieces of artwork. Some people feel safer reaching out for help online rather than in person, and there are a lot of resources you can find on social media for emotional support. That being said, though, social media can have a very negative effect on your well-being in a lot of different ways. There have been many studies done on how social media affects one's mental health, and the results are really predominantly negative. There are associations with high social media use and depression, anxiety, low self-esteem, inadequacy, problems with sleeping, FOMO, which is short for a fear of missing out, which is a type of social anxiety disorder, loneliness, and memory deficits. We'll explore a couple of these negative characteristics more in depth. So human beings, we really need face-to-face contact to be mentally healthy. Prioritizing social media over in-person relationships greatly increases your risk of depression. It's like the empty calories of socialization, if you will. Something that I find interesting is that certain social media platforms are associated with depression in different age demographics. So for example, the association between Facebook use and depression risk was greater among adults under 35, but Snapchat and TikTok, the risk seemed to be greater in adults older than 35. Now, feelings of inadequacy and low self-worth. There is this term that therapists like to use called compare and despair. Now, it is a perfectly normal response to compare yourself to others because we naturally want to fit in socially. So we look for cues of those around us to make sure we're not sticking out or doing something abnormal. When it comes to social media, however, even if you know that the images you're viewing on social media are manipulated, they can still make you feel insecure about how you look or what's going on in your own life. Recently, I was watching a documentary about a music festival that really crashed and burned. And in that documentary, they talk about the power of social media. And I could not find this company, but they mentioned that there's a company out there where you can pay to have a professional photo shoot done on a fancy plane on a tarmac. The plane never leaves the tarmac, mind you, but people want to look like they're living that it life. But it's not real, and the lengths that people go through to portray this image is insane. And people can really say or be anything that they want to online, which brings me to this State Farm clip that illustrates this point. And I hope everybody can.
With my State Farm Pocket Agent app, you can also...
Oh, hey, Mike. Where do you have to?
Just diagramming this accident with my State Farm Pocket Agent app. You can also get a quote and pay your premium with this thing.
I thought State Farm didn't have all those apps.
Where'd you hear that?
The internet.
And you believed it?
Yeah. They can't put anything on the internet that isn't true.
Where'd you hear that? The internet.
Oh, look, here comes my date. I met him on the internet. He's a French model.
Bonjour.
State Farm.
Okay, I hope you all found that as amusing as I did. But on a serious note, I hope we all know that we can't believe everything that we see on the internet. And these facades that people put on can really foster feelings of envy and dissatisfaction and make you feel like you're behind in life or just not good enough in general, which leads me to our next subtopic. FOMO.
More mobile than...
Let's get there here. Now, FOMO is an acronym short for fear of missing out. The idea that you're missing out on certain things can impact your self-esteem, trigger anxiety, and fuel even more social media use. FOMO can cause you to develop a serious addiction to your phone, checking it every few minutes. You're taking risks in order to check it, for example, while you're driving, or you're sacrificing your sleep at night, or you're prioritizing your phone over real world relationships. I myself have a good friend who's got the worst case of addiction to his phone I've ever seen. I mean, the man can't even put it down for longer than a half an hour at a time to charge without getting very antsy. So it is a real thing. And while FOMO is not recognized as an anxiety disorder on its own yet in the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual of Mental Disorders and Illnesses, it's categorized as more of a branch of social anxiety. So while most of us think of social anxiety as a fear of being around people, FOMO is like the inverse of that, a fear of missing out on what's happening around you. Now, social media can really create this sense of social exclusion. Our brains process rejection and physical pain using some of the same neural pathways, meaning that when your feelings get hurt, your brain processes it in a similar way to how it processes physical pain. It contributes to shaping this perception about yourself that you don't fit in with what you're perceiving as reality, or that you're behind in some way. And if you're experiencing this exposure over and over again, especially as a young person, this really shapes your development. Now, your prefrontal cortex is the last part of our brains to mature. It takes about until age 25 to finish. And this area of the brain is involved in decision-making, impulse control, knowing how to conduct yourself in social situations, your attention span, and we'll talk about how your attention and memory are affected a little bit more later on. But this makes it very challenging for young people to resist that persuasive design. The brain is still developing, so your self-awareness and willpower are still building up. And social media can really permanently change young people's brain structure through neuroplasticity, which is your brain's ability to modify or change its structure and function over a period of time. And this impacts how they will think about themselves, how they will feel, and how they will act throughout the rest of their lives. So it's very easy to develop an addiction, especially while your brain is still developing. It's that much more vulnerable to those changing pathways. At any given moment, our brains need to determine what's important. The brain circuit involved in wanting is much more powerful than the brain circuit involving satisfaction. The persuasive scrolling design is constantly stimulating our dopamine neurotransmitters, which are essentially happy chemicals or pleasure messengers that fire off between nerve cells. Hopefully all of you or most of you have watched the Netflix film that Keith had recommended, The Social Dilemma. In that documentary, it's mentioned that the only producers of a product that call their customer base users are drug dealers and software companies, which really alludes to the power of that persuasive design that these companies have really mastered. They go on to talk about how your smartphones are always watching and listening to you. They track your eye movement, your swiping habits, how long you pause over something, and shows you advertisements and all of these bits and pieces of information that are designed to captivate you, even if you didn't want them to. Just as an example, I have a coworker who used to have some pet ducks, and we would talk about these pet ducks at work. And soon enough, with no time at all, my social media feed, specifically my Instagram, blew up with all of these images and advertisements and videos about people with pet ducks. I had never even known that people could have a pet duck as a pet until having this conversation with a coworker. And then my social media was just showing me everything that you can about pet ducks. So it really just goes to show you that your phone will show you anything that you're talking about, which can set you up for confirmation bias. And we'll discuss how that can feed into misinformation and fake news a little bit later. Now, before we go into the issues with the spread of misinformation and how your cognition is essentially hijacked, let's talk a bit about how memory processes are impacted. Memory is the chain that connects your past to your present. There are essentially 3 stages of how memory is encoded and stored. You have your sensory memory, your working or short-term memory, and your long-term memory. Your sensory memory is stored for just a few seconds at most. This comes from the stimulation of the 5 senses.
Sorry. Oh my gosh, stop.
5 senses, so taste, touch, smell, sight, and sound. It's typically only stored for as long as the sense is being stimulated for. We're always being presented with this sensory information, but most of it has no impact to our lives, such as what color car was the gentleman in front of you driving when you got off the freeway this morning, or was the DMV employee wearing a uniform when you went to renew your license? What we view as valuable information is then encoded into your short-term memory, and the rest is discarded. Short-term memory houses small pieces of information that are kept for longer than a few seconds, but generally less than 1 minute, unless you're able to encode it into your long-term memory. In psychology, there is what we refer to as this magic number 7 plus or minus 2, which refers to the number of items most adults can store in their short-term memory, which is between 5 and 9 before the information is either degraded and lost or transferred into the long term. There are some ways that you can help yourself transfer information from the short term to the long term memory, such as rehearsal, like we see with our friend up here, repeating things over and over and over again for 15 to 30 seconds. Chunking is another great way where you're kind of categorizing groups of things together and being able to kind of remember them because they're similar in some fashion. With long-term memory, there is no capacity that we know of. It's stable and can last a very long time, anywhere from hours to years. You do have to be able to retrieve this information before it can be used. But all of that being said, social media has been proven to have some negative effects on one's memory. Your sensory and short-term memory, but especially your sensory, is constantly being overwhelmed with a continuous bombardment of new information through a simple refresh of your fingertips. And it's simply not possible to encode all of this information, nor would you really want to. But this in turn creates deficits in your transactive memory. Transactive memory is what decides what information can be stored in your brain and what can be outsourced, typically through other people. There was a study I read where the participants were asked to record an experience using their social media, and other groups were asked to just experience the situation and not record anything. And at the end of the study, those who had recorded or shared their event showed more of a memory deficit than those who experienced the event without ever recording it. So externalizing the experience worsened the participant's memory because the brain received this message that it didn't need to hold on to that information. It's being stored elsewhere. The studies have also shown that when you post something, your memory of that event can potentially be altered based on the reaction that you get. Our memory is very vulnerable to suggestion that distorts our recollections, and this leads to the creation of false memories. A false memory is something that did not actually happen or happened in a different way than what actually transpired. Now, I want to clarify, a false memory is not the same thing as a lie. With a lie, you know that you are manipulating the truth in some way, but with a false memory, you don't. You sincerely believe that that's what happened. Now, human perception is not perfect. We miss things all of the time. Some causes that lead to false memories are inaccurate perception. One of the ways false memories can form is because the information was never properly encoded in the first place, and our minds will try to fill in those gaps of what information was lost in the encoding process. And we tend to make inferences to fill these gaps, but our old memories and experiences are competing with newer information. Your emotions can have an impact as well. Sometimes strong emotions can make an experience more memorable, but they can also sometimes lead to mistaken memories. A study in 2007 found that false memories were significantly more frequent during periods of intense emotion, regardless of if that emotion is positive or negative. It's just your state of emotional arousal that really solidifies that. Misattribution, mixing up the details of one story with the details of another, or misremembering where you got a particular piece of information from. Another theory that plays a role into the creation of false memories is what we call fuzzy tracing. We don't always remember the nitty-gritty details of an experience, and instead remember an overall impression of what happened. And sometimes we make verbatim traces of events, and other times we make only very vague gist traces. And verbatim traces are based on the real events as they actually happened, while gist traces are centered on our interpretation of the events. All of this means that sometimes how we interpret information does not accurately reflect what actually happened. And this in turn can create biased interpretations of events and can lead to false memories and misinformation. So fake news and misinformation found on social media, as I hope we all know, can really fuel false memories, especially if the stories align with their political beliefs. This sets you up for that confirmation bias where you're constantly looking for evidence that your opinion is correct and ignoring anything to the contrary. Negative information does get more attention and shapes emotion and behavior more powerfully than positive information does, because darn it, we are wired for survival. So that's just how it works. And our brains process fear quicker than positive information. Ergo, social media content that generates fear and disgust or anger has a higher engagement level and therefore spreads much faster. And the spread of potential misinformation just erodes and destroys public trust. So how can you tell? I mean, we're in the midst of a massive infodemic with so many pieces of information around you. Sometimes it's hard to know what's true and what's not. At the beginning of 2022, I had decided to clean up my diet a little bit and try to get a little healthier. And while I was researching, these articles and clips and what have you on how to achieve my goals with my body type and my needs, it just seemed like every single thing I read contradicted the very last thing I read. And it was very frustrating to know what was legit and what wasn't. I think someone's not muted. So sorry.
Bless you.
Thank you, Travis. Okay, so that being said, here is a short clip on how some tips on how to spot fake news.
And sensationalist. Here are 5 ways to spot fake news. Number 1, look for unusual URLs. If they end with .lo or .com.co, chances are they aren't legitimate news sites. Number 2, dissect the layout. Look for grammatical errors, incorrect dates, bold claims with no sources, and sensationalist images. These are all red flags. Number 3, dig deeper. Find out who wrote the article and who supports the site. If this information doesn't exist, or you need to register to get it, then question why. Number 4, cross-check. Use fact-checking sites to confirm information and see whether other credible news outlets are reporting similar news. Number 5, try a reverse image search. If the same picture appears in unrelated stories, you may have a reason to be suspicious. For more media literacy tips, visit us at commonsense.org.
Okay, now I know that was a little obvious. A lot of fake news out there isn't going to be as obvious and therefore can be persuasive, but those points still stand. Keep an eye out for websites that are very flashy. Check your sources. I have read articles before that seemed very legit, but when I wanted to know more about where they got their information or how a study was conducted, and I click on those source links, they don't even exist, or they route somewhere that was certainly not credible. So they do get you with putting those links on there. Actually check them. Misspelled words. I've been on websites I thought were convincing, and when a word is misspelled, it just takes away the entire credibility of the site. Like, how do I know that you know what you're talking about if you can't even spell correctly? That's very important. Consider your own biases as well. Make sure they aren't manipulating your interpretation of the message. I have this little anagram up here, SPOT, for source, purpose, ownership, and timeliness. Source, is the news from the original source? Does it come from Twitter or a reputable newspaper? What was the original story or message? Has it been used and conveyed correctly? Is there evidence to support it? And you could go on. Purpose, What is the purpose of the story? Why was the news written? To inform or to entertain? Is the source biased or presenting personal or religious views? Ownership. Who are the authors? Are they a corporation or an organization? Are they reputable? Are they experts in their field? And what credentials do they even have? Timeliness. When was this published? Is this publication the original? Is it even relevant to the current time? Have there been retractions or updates? So these are all very good things that you can ask yourself when you're trying to make a determination on if something or some news is legit or not. Oh, let's get out of there. All right, so let's talk about some statistics. While correlation does not necessarily mean causation, there is definitely a connection between high social media use and mental illness. By 2017, 69% of adults were using social media compared to just 5% in 2005. From 2009 to 2017, the rate of adults reporting symptoms of major depression grew by 63% in adults ages 18 to 25. Experiencing psychological distress in a given month grew 71% in young adults from 2008 to 2017. The rate of suicidal thoughts in young adults increased by 47% in that same time. 8th graders who spend over 10 hours on social media per week are 56% more likely to report being unhappy than those who spend less time on social media. And these statistics, I mean, they go on and on and on. So there's a very significant connection between social media and these challenges that can happen. So what are some ways that we can minimize these negative effects? Set a time frame or a limit of how much you'll be on social media a day or a week. Of course, check your sources like we talked about. Take long breaks. Now, everybody is on a different level of how much they use social media, but regardless of whatever your use level is, it's always good to take a step back and just turn it off for a while and, you know, focus on what's around you, and really helps you get out of that digital socialization mindset. Focus on what you have rather than what you lack. Keep a journal, seek out real connections, focus on gratitude. Social media really trains us to compare our lives instead of appreciating everything that we have and everything that we are. And of course, moderation. Anything can be dangerous if it's not moderated. And social media doesn't necessarily have to be a terrible thing. And in conclusion, you know, it's something that definitely needs to be used wisely and impacts your perception of yourself and of the world. Be wary of the infodemic we are in, and research your articles and your sources. And I wouldn't recommend sharing them with others until you do, because although you may not take it in a certain way without doing that extensive research, the person that you're sharing it with might and could be prone to running wild with these things. And there you go, just spreading misinformation. So, but that is all that I have for you guys today. So thank you for listening to my presentation. And I guess it's about lunchtime.
Thank you, Stephanie. That was good. Phones are off until 1:30, so everybody should grab some lunch and then they can come on back and I'll be all together on the phones at 1:30. But thanks, Stephanie. That was really, really good.
Good. Thank you, Keith. I appreciate it. All right, everybody, have a wonderful day. We'll talk to you later.